All right. Isaac, do you want to kick it off or do you want me to kick it off?
I'll just give a brief welcome message. Yeah, so thanks for coming to the second webinar for our housing market analysis study. We've got a consultant firm working with us on this, RKG Associates, and they're gonna take the lead on this webinar. But if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A box. You can see a button at the bottom on the bottom bar, and then I'll give Kyle the questions at the end for a Q&A session. So this webinar is going to cover mainly existing conditions. Kyle and his team have done a lot of analysis on the current housing market and demographics in the county, so got a lot of good information. So should be interesting.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Isaac. Once again, good evening, everyone. I am Kyle Talenti. I'm the president of RKG Associates. As Isaac mentioned, we're going to be presenting the market analysis existing conditions as we have them to today. So we're going to review some of the demographics and the information about the people and households that exist within Roanoke County. We're going to talk about some workforce information and how that influences housing need within the county. We'll talk about the supply side, the residential market, both ownership and rental. And then we have compared those two. And so that's what the housing needs trends are, looking at demand versus supply and where are there gaps. We also held a survey of the community back during August, I believe it was. And we got several hundred responses, which was fantastic. And we're going to kind of walk you through some of the things that we learned on there. Then we'll talk a little bit about the next steps of the project. And then, as Isaac mentioned, if you have questions on the bottom, first of all, you need to maximize the screen on your computer. But on the bottom in the right-hand corner, there's a box with a question mark in it. And underneath it says Q&A. If you click on that, you can type in a question. It will go to Isaac. You can type that now. If you have a question right now, you can type that during the presentation. You have a question about something that we present. And then at the end of it, Isaac will read those questions off and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities. And then we'll talk about meetings 3 and 4 before we get done with all of this. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first slide you're looking at is we looked at trends in population changes, both for Roanoke County and for the MSA. If you're not familiar, the MSA includes, Valerie, I'm going to mute you.
Could I ask you one thing?
I'm sorry, Valerie, you can post the question in the Q&A and then Isaac can ask me the question, but we're going to have folks speak.
I don't see any Q&A box. I don't see any Q&A box anywhere.
Okay, across the bottom, there should be a bunch of icons. The one says participants, chat, host tools, apps, blah, blah, blah. There should be a button that is black and white. That is a box. Hold on, I'm going to share a different screen so you can see what I'm seeing. Give me one moment. I'm going to stop that sharing. Then I'm going to share a different screen. This will be a little bit freaky. I apologize.
I found it. I found it.
Oh, good. All right. Now I'm going to go back. All right. Thank you, Valerie. Okay. So let me get back to sharing the screen I was on. My apologies. Boom. There we go. Okay. Isaac, can you see the presentation again? Give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Okay. So what you're looking at here is population changes for both for Roanoke County, but we also looked at it for the MSA, which is Botetourt, Craig Franklin, Roanoke counties, as well as Roanoke City and Salem City. And then we also looked at a comparison against the Commonwealth. Really, the takeaway here is that Roanoke County has been a very attractive and popular place for people to live. You can see prior to 2024, the population of the county actually has grown faster than it has for the region as a whole. Interesting thing about the data being projected by the Weldon Cooper Center, which is part of the University of Virginia, is that they're actually projecting for populations to decline over the next 5 or so years. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But then those trends are projected to reverse both locally here in Roanoke County as well as the MSA. And part of the challenge is, and the reason why we believe that that is happening, is that housing development hasn't been as strong. And not just here in the county, but nationally, the average household size has gone down. And so when the net number of new households isn't going up and then households are getting smaller, that's why you generally see population decline, is because you're just not adding enough households to replace the loss of population. And the reason why households are getting smaller, and like I said, this is not unique to Roanoke County, is that the baby boom generation, the folks that are a few years older than me, are moving into their empty nester and or retiree households where maybe there's only one or two people. So what used to be three, four, or five, or even more people in a household is now down to one or two. And and we'll talk about this in a moment. The predominant growth in Roanoke County has been senior households. And so you're having a lot of 1 and 2 person households move and continue to reside in the community. And as a result, that's why you've seen a little bit of a population loss. From a housing needs perspective, what this is telling us is that one, that there's not a lot of family households or larger households relative to the net number of households that are in the community in the county, and we'll talk about that in a bit too. But two is there's demand for smaller units. When you see a lot of 1 and 2 person households, 4 and 5 bedroom homes aren't necessarily, now some smaller households like having a lot of bedrooms. I know my in-laws like having a bigger house because when we come to visit, the grandkids get to stay with them. But the point I'm making is that there's a demand for smaller housing units too. And that is something that has been trending upward and is projected to continue into the future. What you're looking at here is a comparison of the different municipalities around Roanoke County and what their projected population changes are. As you can see, Roanoke City and Montgomery County, down where Christiansburg and Blacksburg actually have seen net population growth. That's not terribly surprising. Those are the two communities that have the most walkable and highly amenitized neighborhoods in which to live. And so you're seeing a lot of people move to those areas. Those are also areas where you tend to have a different mix of housing, where there's a lot more opportunities for smaller units, particularly like a Roanoke City. But you can see that population gain, particularly for Roanoke County, even though we have projected to have a small decline over the next couple of years, that's projected to reverse. And once again, I want to go back to the point that is Roanoke County has been and continues to be and likely will continue to be a desirable place for people to live. For those of you who live in the county or have lived in the region for a long time, you know that housing values in the community have gone up quite substantially. Rents have gone up quite substantially, and that's a reflection of the imbalance between the demand for people who want to live in Roanoke County and the change in supply that has occurred in recent history. We also looked at it from population by race and ethnicity, and the data that you're looking at is for Roanoke County. And the big takeaway for us here is that the county is becoming more diverse. You can see that the net number of people that identify as white between 2013 and 2023 actually has declined some in the county, while all of the other, the persons of color population groups actually have seen an increase in growth. And while this is not a good or a bad thing per se, from a housing perspective, particularly when you look at the Latino population, it might be signaling that there's a change in housing typology demand. More particularly households of colors tend to have a higher incidence of, for example, multi-generational households, where a parent will live with a grandparent and their children. And also they tend to be larger households too. They tend to have more kids on average. And the data, actually, I'll show you in a moment, kind of bears that out. So as I mentioned, we looked at this in terms of households by household size. And you can see here for family households, there has been actually net decline from 2013 to 2023, but the predominance has been growth in percentage-wise in larger households, 5-person households. But you can see the net number of households, particularly for non-family households, which 1 and 2 persons tend to be non-family households. Or 1 person, by definition, can't be a family because it's an individual. But 2-person non-family households, you can see the net number growth has been pretty substantial. There's been an increase of almost 1,500, 1,500 one-person households during that 10-year period, which is quite substantial. And so, as I mentioned, you're seeing growth of smaller households is the largest net number, but the diversification of the county also is bringing some larger households in as well. We also looked at the information by age of people moving into the community, both from an owner-occupied household and from a renter-occupied household. And the big takeaway for us here, and you're looking at that data on the right side, is the largest growth has been in seniors and older persons, 55 and older. You can see the percentage changes, both for owners up 30%, or more than almost 3,000 households of owner-occupied that are now more 65 plus. And then you see the growth even on the rental side. I know that there was a housing study done not too long ago, and they said that the demand was going to come from younger people and older people, even for rental housing. And that data has borne out, as you can see on the lower table there, where you've seen a net increase of 60% of renters over 55 to 64, and a 34% increase of renters 65 plus. And so from a housing study perspective, what this really means for us is, yet again, is older households tend to have a different demand. And we'll talk about that more a little bit when we get into the survey, particularly for single level homes or homes that have, like, for example, a master on the ground floor. You're going to see an evolution of the type of housing that's being demanded in the community because of these demographic shifts. In terms of looking at it by income level, what you see here is in part the natural change if you're looking from previous years to current years, because income levels do rise. And so you do see a natural shift from lower income households to higher income households. However, what you're seeing here in the data is a substantial change that can't be explained just because households are making more money in the concentration of households earning at or above $100,000 moving into the community. We're going to talk about workforce in a moment and explain to you why this is very, very significant. But from our perspective, when you look at it from a housing market perspective, this kind of shows that Roanoke County is in high demand. People that have housing choice, that have financial means, are choosing to be here. And when we don't have enough housing unit growth to match the demand in new housing, that's part of the reason why all of you are seeing the escalation of values within the county. And this has been particularly strong over the past 3 or 4 years since COVID. The pandemic has come and gone. You're seeing a high concentration. And this is impactful if the county is trying to meet housing needs, and we'll talk about this a little more in a moment, that not every household in the county earns at or above $100,000. And so for folks who are here now that want to continue to stay here, or for folks that maybe work in the county that don't earn above $100,000, this trend is showing how that's going to make it harder and harder for them as time moves on, unless we do something about the balance between supply and demand. Now, I'm going to talk from time to time about area median income levels or thresholds. It's important when you're doing a housing study that you study things in these different thresholds. And the reason why is very simple, is that many of the housing programs that exist, both nationally in the state and locally, are defined who is able to access them by what percentage of AMI they earn. And so this graphic here on the right is showing you what the income bands are for owner households and renter households in these different thresholds. So 30%, 50%, 80%, 100%, 120% are industry standard thresholds that you take a look at when you're talking about housing need, because if you just generally define the term affordability, housing affordability, it is housing that a household can afford to pay for that doesn't make them cost burdened. And HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, defines cost burden as spending more than 30% of your gross income on housing. So if you make $120,000 a year, that's $10,000 a month. 30% of that is $3,000 a month. And so if you're spending less than $3,000 a month and you make $120,000, you're not considered cost burden. If you spend more than that on housing, you are considered cost burden. And so we wanted to give you all, and this presentation will be made available afterwards as well, but give you a sense of when I talk about households earning at 50% of AMI, that's talking somewhere between $36,000 and $41,000, and households earning 80% of AMI is somewhere between $58,000 and $66,000, depending upon if they're a renter household or an owner household. So we just wanted to show this to you all so you have that point of reference. I'm not expecting you to remember it, but this will be made available so you can refer back to it as we go through here. I mentioned that the next section we're going to talk about is the workforce piece. The first component that we wanted to take a look at is commuting patterns. People who work in Roanoke County but live outside the county, people who live and work in Roanoke County, and people who live in Roanoke County but work outside the county. And so that's the three buckets that you're looking at. And that's the data that you're looking at here on the screen. And really the big takeaways for us in this information is, of the 35-ish thousand jobs that exist in Roanoke County, only 10,000 of those jobs are filled by people who live in Roanoke County. It's 2.5 to 1 of people who work in the county live somewhere else. Now, as you all know, people choose to live where they live for a number of reasons. They choose to live there because it's all they can afford. They choose to live there because they want the lifestyle that that area provides. They choose to live there because it's close to families or to communities, or it's in the area of the church they like to attend. And so there's all sorts of different reasons that people choose to live where they do. However, when we look at data like this, when you see this disparity between people who work here but have to live or choose to live outside the county and people who live and work here, is an indication to us that there's some sort of mismatch between the housing that's available in that community and the jobs that have been created in that community. And so this is where the income information that I referenced earlier comes into play. What you're looking at here are the largest occupations of jobs that are currently in Roanoke County. The blue bar is what those jobs pay on the median, the 50th percentile job in that occupation pays. And then we're showing you what the income bands are for 30%, 50%, 80%, and 100%, which is the different color oranges. And I'm going to say oranges, even though I know when you get down here, it's more of a tan. And what the takeaway from this is, as you can see here, only 3 of the top 10 largest occupations pay above 80% of AMI for the region. And the 4 largest occupations, retail sales worker, material moving workers, food and beverage workers, home health, pay below 50% of the area median income. And why this is important, as you saw a couple slides ago, is when households that are moving into the community are in large part earning at or above $100,000, they're setting the market, if you will, for what housing is going to cost. But the vast majority of jobs that we have here in the county don't pay enough to compete in that marketplace. There's nothing wrong with having people move from the outside of the community because they want to retire, for example, to Roanoke County, or because maybe they work at Virginia Tech and they would rather live up near in Roanoke County. That's fantastic. However, there's a mismatch between the pricing of housing here in the county and what the vast majority of people who work here in the county, what they can afford to pay. So the previous slide looked at it, the total number of existing jobs that are already here. This slide is showing you the projection of new jobs over the next 10 years, the largest occupations that are projected to grow. So where are the jobs that are going to be created in the county? How much do they pay? And very similar to the previous slide, 3 of the 10 pay above 100% of AMI, but the vast majority of them pay somewhere between 50 and 80%. So as you can see, the incomes ranging from $42,000 to $52,000, and the largest projected growth earns below 50% of AMI. Once again, this is the finding is not necessarily a good or bad thing in its own right, but from a housing demand analysis, the jobs that are here and the jobs that are created generally can't afford much of the housing that exists in the county. And so that creates the situation that you saw earlier, where the majority of persons who work in the county live somewhere else. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing per se, but I know we all are concerned about, for example, traffic and transportation accessibility. Well, the more people that work here have to live somewhere else, the more they have to be on the roads. And so that's just one of the facets of looking at this and like, all right, what do we do about this, Kyle? Which, by the way, we're not there yet. So hold your horses on that for me. But what do we do about this is some of the things that, what can creating more housing and a more diverse price of housing and a more diverse type of housing do for us as a community? And that's one of the things that we can do with that solution. We also looked at it from a special needs population perspective, because there is a whole cohort of individuals that live here in the county and live in the region that have a different type of housing need than folks that do not have those. The data that you're looking at here on the screen is the data for Roanoke County. And so as you can see here, over the past 10 years, the net number of people who have a disability, some form of disability, physical disability, mental disability, has increased almost 30% in the past 10 years, with the largest being in individuals between 18 and 34. Now, part of this is that as time has gone on a positive note, is the identifying what a disability is and defining what that is has become more clear. And so folks are more understanding of what that disability is. But you see, as our community has grown, so has the needs of individuals. The graphic on the lower part is populations by earning of individuals that are over 16, because people under 16 aren't, aren't going to be, well, hopefully they're not working. They're not working legally. How about that? Let's put it that way. Is that is vast majority are households earning at or above 35,000, or individuals that are earning at or above 35,000, which with the largest growth being earning above $50,000 or more. So on one note, you're seeing a growth in households, but it's also reflecting the change in households that has gone on as more higher income households move to the community. From a housing needs perspective, from a housing strategy perspective, what this is telling us is that there probably is a need for strategies to help identify, particularly for new construction housing, is how do you incorporate things that can help make those housing units more accessible to individuals that have disabilities. And by the way, there's a strong correlation between people over the age of 65 and in particular having a physical disability. So this data is very consistent with what we're seeing in the change in your population as well. But the point I'm making is that as you're looking at potential solutions, both, well, if we look at it for new construction housing, how do we do things like universal design, where we require, for example, multifamily buildings to have a zero entry into the building where you don't have to go up a step? Or how do you provide at least one bathroom with a 3-foot wide door so that if there's individuals that have a wheelchair, they'll be able to get in and out? Or do you put the blocking in the walls in the bathrooms so that you don't need to necessarily install them when the unit is built, but if someone needs it, the blocking is already inside the wall, so you can just bolt the handrail so that people can use the facilities more safely, and it's already in place so that you don't have to tear open a wall to make that happen. So those are some of the solutions that could possibly come out of that, but that's from a new construction side. From the other side is, because a lot of our housing is older here in the county, most of it is probably not ADA compliant or handicap accessible. So do we look at things like, do we create programs to help seniors with financial need that can no longer go up and down their stairs to build a ramp, for example? And so are there strategies that we can put out there to help households that don't have the financial means to do it themselves to be able to then make the home that they acquire accessible to them based on their particular need? And so once again, I'm starting to talk a little bit about solutions, and we're not quite there yet, but I'm just kind of tying the information that what that means to us all. Another component of special needs housing that we took a look at was homeless persons. And the data that you're looking on the right side there is not just for Roanoke County, but it's for the entire region. The data is not identified by municipality, and persons that are homeless by nature don't have a home. And so you can't particularly assign them to one community or another. But this is information that's collected by the homeless advocacy and the homeless support organizations in the region. And the real takeaway for us here is, one, there is a growth in homelessness in the greater region. both in individuals who are homeless, but also families who are homeless, and in particular, families with children who are homeless. And so from that perspective there's kind of twofold opportunity here. One, what, if anything, does the county want to do to try and help mitigate some of that challenges for those who have become homeless, whether it's shelters or transitional housing or permanent housing targeted towards people who are coming out of homelessness? But also on the flip side of that coin is, how do we help folks that are currently housed and living in Roanoke County from becoming homeless? So are there prevention strategies, for example, foreclosure assistance, or once again, I'll go back to the conversation we just had around persons with disabilities. Are there programs to help people that can get a handicap ramp built onto their house so they don't have to leave their house and then you don't have nowhere else to go? So there's two prongs that come out of this, but once again, this data is for the region, not just for Roanoke County, but is there a strategy? Is there a priority from the county to try and participate in the solution of these things from the provision of housing, but then also how do we help folks that are living here now not become homeless? I'm going to transition a little bit. Now we're moving away from the demand side, which is talking about households and people. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the supply side, which is the housing that you have. Not surprising to us, and I'm sure not surprising to you all, 3/4 of the housing units in Roanoke County are single family detached homes, with apartments being another 14%. And so you are very concentrated in a single type of housing, 75%. That's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it's just a thing to take into account. As you saw, the net number of renter households has gone up, senior renter households have gone up. The demand for housing is across the age spectrum with a concentration on more established, older homes. And so even though we have a lot of single family homes, not all of them are patio homes. Some of them, many of them are multi-level. And so that's just things that we need to take into consideration. I will say, though, that when we looked at the data, the lower right-hand corner, housing development by typology, the county has been moving more and more towards a mixture of multifamily and things like townhomes than just traditional single family. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, most of the larger traditional single family development lots are gone. There's not a lot of, and we're going to talk about this at meeting number 3 in more depth, but there's not a lot of lots that are consistent for developing larger single family subdivisions left in the county. And two, you're seeing a lot of infill investment decisions along existing commercial corridors and in areas that are already strong economic activities. And as land gets more expensive, you need to yield more units to be able to make the development feasible. And so that's another reason why you're seeing that transition is the cost of land in Roanoke County continues to go up and up and up. And so it becomes more and more challenging to build one unit on a half-acre lot as opposed to having to build, quarter-acre lots or 5 units per acre to be able to make it happen, or in many cases, moving into a multifamily type of strategy. So this is not uncommon or atypical of communities that don't have a lot of easily developable parcels of land left and are seeing a lot of interest in investment for people who want to live in highly amenitized walkable areas, which will tend to be those already developed commercial corridors, particularly in Roanoke County, that then lend towards having to do things like multifamily development to make them feasible. The one takeaway that we have from this that we wanted to bring to you all is, even in today, we are not building at a level of development intensity that is consistent even with suburban communities. What you're looking at here in the graphic, the bluish purple bar is the development density of projects or of housing that has been built since 2000 in the county. And the gray bar is what the industry standard is for those development typologies. So for example, the townhouse developments we've built have been about 12.6 units per acre, where industry standard, even in a suburban area, is about 16. And you can see across all different housing typologies, what we're building really isn't to the level of development intensity that is typically found in suburban communities. And so the takeaway for us is, particularly as we look at housing values are increasing faster than people can afford. We're not building a lot of housing. We're seeing, the market is skewing towards the highest income households, which is making it challenging for folks who live here now to stay here. We heard anecdotally through interviews, and it was noted in a survey a few times that folks are concerned. They want their kids want to be able to move back home to the community that they live in, and they can't find a suitable and price appropriate housing unit for them to live in the county based on the work that they're doing. And so those are the types of issues that we're talking about, which is looking at previous historic development trends and development intensities compared to what they typically are. And I put typically in air quotes because they can range substantially. But the reality is we have the opportunity as we move forward to try and get the most out of the parcels that are still developable, the infill and the redevelopment that still can happen in the county, so that we can maximize how many units we bring to help address that housing need or the changing housing dynamics that are making it challenging for folks to stay and for new folks who are coming here to come. From a development trends perspective, and this is just identifying the impact of the demand being greater than the supply, what you're looking at here is median rent for apartments in the county over the past 10 or so years has gone up over almost $500, which is like a 60%, I'm doing that math in my head, increase in 10 years, which is substantial, and it's projected to continue into the future. The reality is once again, I go back to my first point, Roanoke County is a place that people want to live, and when there's more people that want to live there than there's housing being developed, it creates price escalation, both on the rental side, and we're about to talk about on the ownership side. So this next graphic shows you, we're going back to the 10 largest occupations in the county and what they would be able to afford in a monthly rent, which is those blue bars, if they spent 30% of their income on housing, on an apartment. And then the gray dash line is what the median rent is today. Excuse me. And as you can see, only 3 of the 10 largest occupations have enough money or would be able to pay less than 30% of their gross income to rent at the median here in the marketplace, with teachers being just below the line. And so a lot of times people talk about emergency services or first responders or community service employees. Teachers is a great example of, on average, the average teacher isn't going to be able to even afford the median rent, let alone like a new constructed unit, which is going to be priced at the highest end of the marketplace. And the situation is very similar for ownership. What you're looking at the graphic on the right is the average sale price of units that are 5 years or older, and then the average sale price of units that have been built in the past 5 years. And as you can see, because of that imbalance in supply and demand, the market is building to a price point that is substantially higher than much of the housing that has already existed in Roanoke County. I want to stress, you heard me say this, and I apologize that I'm beating the dead horse, but this is not necessarily a good or bad thing just on its own face value. But the reality is, as we talked about all the different components that's going on, because we don't have enough supply and the demand continues to outpace it, it's driving prices up. And before we start blaming the developers, I want to make sure you're clear about this, that they're just trying to meet the highest end of the market. Land acquisition is competitive, and developer A wants to build a townhouse development, and maybe they would really like to build townhouses at $150,000, but they're not the only developer who's trying to get ownership of that land to build a project. And so you have to be price competitive to be able to acquire land to then be able to build. And so if the market's willing to pay $300,000 for a townhouse, even if you want to build something different, you're not going to be able to pay that property owner as much as someone who is going to build to where the market is. And so before we start blaming developers and saying, oh, this is, blah, 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 the reality is that they have to be able to acquire the land to be able to build these developments. And to do so, they have to compete with other developers to get access. And so they have to try and maximize how many units they get out of the land and then what they can charge for those units so they can afford to pay more for the dirt. There's no blame per se, other than the fact that because Roanoke is such a desirable place to live and we're not delivering enough units to mitigate that demand without seeing increase in prices even for existing housing, that's the challenge that we run into. And I will say, and you see there on the last bullet on the screen or the main bullet, the market can't address it on its own. to say, well, figure out how to build $150,000 townhomes, Kyle. It's just not financially possible because yet again, I'm going to offer Isaac $2 million for his piece of land, and I'm going to build $200,000 townhomes. Jason, my colleague who's on this call, is going to offer him $4 million for land because he's going to build the $300,000 townhomes. Well, that landowner is obviously going to take Jason's offer and not mine. And so that's just the way, unfortunately, that's how the market works. And so without some sort of intervention from the county, this trend will continue. And we're going to talk in a couple of weeks about, or in a couple of meetings about what those interventions can be. And this is just to show that housing costs are increasing faster than incomes. We wanted to show you at an 80% of AMI, which as you saw, well, not a minority of jobs in the county can pay that, is 80% of AMI owner household can pay about $200,000 using an FHA mortgage for a home without being cost burdened. And a renter household can pay about $1,400 a month, which if you remember is what it's projected the median rent price to be in just 5 years. So we took this information, say, okay, let's compare how many housing units are priced at the different income levels, 30, 50, 80, 100, and then greater than 100, and then how many households are there. And this graphic shows you those households that are paying more than 30% of their income as a percentage of all the households in these different income groups. Well, what you're seeing here is very logical to the conversation we've been having, which is the lower the income of the household, the more likely they have to pay more than 30% of their income because there's not enough housing units in those price points to be able to accommodate the demand from those households. These aren't people who are trying to come into the county now. These are people who are in the county right now. They're already county residents. And you could see on the renter side, households earning less than 50% of AMI, which if you remember is in the $40,000 range, 4 out of every 5 of them, more than 4 out of every 5 of them are paying more than 30% of their gross income. On the ownership side, it's a little bit better. You can see it's about 50% below 50% of AMI, but the cost burdening or the impact of not having sufficient housing and as a result price and demand being out of whack is driving households to having to pay more than 30%. Now, some people do that voluntarily. A lot of folks will say, well, I'm willing to pay more for housing because I don't want to own a car and I'm going to live in an area where I don't need a car, where I can walk everywhere I go. I can walk to the bus stop, I can walk to the grocery store, I can even walk to my job. But the reality is when you start paying more than 30% of your income, you then start having to make decisions that are very challenging. Do I pay rent this month or do I pay for do I go to the doctor? Do I pay rent this month or do I buy enough food? And so when you get into those situations, particularly for those households earning at or below $40,000, those decisions become more and more real in a day-to-day situation. So this graphic is looking at ownership housing and showing you the difference between supply, which is the orangish bars, and demand, which are the teal bars. And you can see at the lowest levels, the demand of households that already live here today is substantially higher than that number of units. On the flip side of the coin, you also don't have enough housing units at the highest end of households that are earning above 120% of AMI. And so the impact of this is quite simple. Those households that are earning a substantial amount of money and there's not enough supply that's available to them that's in their price point will then start consuming at a lower level. And that's what drives price escalation. If Kyle owns an apartment complex and the next 3 tenants that move into my apartment complex can pay twice what I'm charging, and I know that there's demand for it, I'm going to then start increasing my rents to reflect what the market is willing to pay me for my unit. And so that's what creates price escalation. So you see that it's on the ownership side and it's also on the renter side. The impact is similar, not the same, but similar on both. We don't have enough housing at the most affordable end. We don't have enough housing at the most expensive end. And as a result, you have cost burdening of individuals and you have price escalation going on. And so the solution isn't just do nothing but build all affordable housing. There's definitely demand for that, and the data makes that very clear. But there is need and opportunity to create housing at different income levels because if you don't build enough at the highest level, you're then going to start continue to put more pressure on those mid-income bands. And so as a result, they will start becoming challenged. And so the point we're making with these data is, one, there is definitely a need for persons who live here, persons who work here at various price points to be able to provide opportunities for folks that choose to or want to live here. We also looked at it from a projected affordability, and as you can see here, what the real takeaway from us is it's not all in one income. So this is looking at the projected demand 5 years from now. It's not all at one income band. There's still demand at the most modest income levels, and there's a continued growing demand at the highest income level. You can see that for owners, more than half the demand for ownership housing is going to be above that 120% of AMI threshold. But the reality is that that demand is continuing to grow, and without solutions to continue to add new housing units at various price points, it's going to continue to not meet all the needs here in the county. So I'm going to transition. This is the last bit of existing data we're going to talk about tonight, and then I'll be happy to answer questions, is the survey we did. As I mentioned, we held a survey for the community. I know the county, Isaac and his team advertised it ad nauseum. We left it open, I think, for a month to try and get responses. And so this is kind of what we've learned. So there were, I'm not going to get the number correct off the top of my head, but I believe there were above 20 questions. We're not going to talk about all of them today. We wanted to dive in on the most important ones, at least from the data from the existing conditions perspective. So the first one we're looking at is we asked people, did you face challenges looking for the current housing unit you live in? And 110 people of the respondents said, yes, I did. And what you're looking at is the most common reasons they gave for the challenges they faced. The largest one, not many available options. Once again, when there's more demand than there's supply, then there's not going to be a lot of options on the marketplace. So that wasn't very surprising. The next one was too expensive. And we've talked a lot about this. So what we've learned from folks that responded is consistent with the data that we're learning, which is there's an imbalance between demand and supply in a marketplace. And as a result, that it's not, it's creating some challenges for folks. So they're settling. They're either paying more than 30% to move in the community, or they're accepting a unit that maybe they don't really, that doesn't fit their lifestyle needs. I talked a lot about the senior households. Maybe they bought a house that has stairs and that has 3 or 4 steps to get up the entrance, and that could be a challenge. And so they're trying to figure out how to make it work because this is where they want to be. The third most popular was not in areas that met my needs. And so for all of you who follow housing trends nationally, there is a continued movement and growing in demand to be in what's called highly amenitized areas, areas that are walkable to services, areas that are walkable to transportation, that provide transportation options other than a car. And so that is bearing out in here because there aren't a lot of areas in the county that offer those services that particularly that are walkable. And I want to talk about the fourth one very quickly, which is something that we heard anecdotally and through the interviews that we've done with real estate experts and community leaders, is not well maintained. And the reason why that's important for us is that what we heard is the houses that are quote unquote more affordable in the county, how a single family home, for example, that sells for 150 or 200 or $250,000, oftentimes has condition issues where you have to invest tens of thousands of dollars more to get them to the point at which you would want them to be able to live. So even if there is a house that you can quote unquote afford, if you're making $50,000 or $60,000 a year, a lot of times those houses have substantial either renovation or aesthetic improvement needs that makes it not desirable for the folks that are looking for houses in those price points. So that was a very interesting thing to learn. We also asked folks, are you looking to move in the next 2 years? 70 of the respondents said, yes, we are. And this was a very interesting finding. It was a split. Younger respondents said they're looking to get into a bigger home. Many times, and they noted in the comments that because they're looking to start or build or expand their families. And another large clump, which was the older folks, were saying they want to get into a smaller home because they've raised their families and now they want to be in a place that maybe doesn't have as big of a yard or doesn't have a second level or only has 1 or 2 bedrooms because they don't really need the 3 or 4 or 5 bedroom home anymore. And so there is definitely a distinction between what the market is demanding. It's not all one or the other. And so from our perspective, this yet again, we talk about when we start talking about solutions, it's not like, all right, we just need to try and build more of this. is how do we expand the range of options, large, small units, single level, multi-level units, ownership rental units. The demand is across all of those different things. And how do we create new opportunities in appropriate locations to try and meet all the different demand that is being identified by folks that are participating and living in the community? We asked them, another question that was very interesting to us was, we said, what do you think the impact would be to the county if there was more newly built housing, price appropriate housing or price diverse housing in the county? And of the people that responded to the survey, more than half of them said it would have a net positive impact. Now, if I'm being honest and fair, which is I always like to do because that's how I'm able to do what I do, is oftentimes people who participate in these housing studies are folks that advocate for more housing. So I'm not terribly surprised. But this also leans back towards what we kind of also intrinsically know is, especially there are folks that think it would have a negative impact. You can see that on the response of that top bar, but also it's not the majority or the vast majority of individuals. It's folks that have a concern. I'm sure you've all heard the term NIMBY before. As someone who's participating in this process, that we already said, people are always about new housing opportunities until it's right next door to them. And that's a real thing. And people absolutely have the right to express their opinion that way. I would never try and take away someone's right to express that opinion of, yes, I know we need new housing, but don't put it near me. I'm concerned about all the different things that folks, traffic and the schools and everything else. But the reality is that there seems an impact. We also asked them, do you feel there are challenges to create new housing? And the vast majority of people said, yes, there was. And I think the next one nope, I'll get to that in a moment. We're going to talk in a minute. I apologize, but they said, yes, there are challenges. And I'm sure when we get to that, you're going to already have a good sense of what those issues are. Higher income earners even reported challenging to find housing. That was another interesting thing that came out of the survey for us, which was it's not just folks who are looking to try and find, moderate or modest or more moderate income housing at 30, 50, 80% of AMI. Even higher income households saying they're challenging because a lot of what's being built at that high end is larger multi-level homes, and not everybody wants or frankly can live in, even if they have resources, live in a home like that, particularly as we talked about the fact that many of the new households coming here are people over the age of 65. When we asked the folks, okay, where would you like to see the new housing developed in the county? Along commercial corridors, infill development, and close into where the region's economic activity center, which is the city of Roanoke, were the most common answers. Near I-81. So the responses that we got from folks are very consistent with what we would call good planning practices. You want to build new housing in areas that are already well served with road and water and sewer. You want to put it in areas where there's already development so you can minimize the sprawl and the impact of things like traffic. And you want to put it in areas where it's proximate to services, like the city of Roanoke, where you have the largest concentration of jobs, or near I-81, where it's going to give you the best transportation access. And so that was good. It was a positive sign or finding for us, is that folks are thinking, that at least the folks that respond to the survey are thinking in what we would define as good planning practices of how do you address new housing development. I mentioned earlier, what challenge do you believe exists in developing new price appropriate housing? The first and number one was lack of community support. You heard me mention the NIMBY, by the way, for those of you who don't know, excuse me, NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. But the lack of community support, and I'm sure you all have heard or participated in or seen in the newspaper, the opposition that some folks have about new housing developments in the county or in certain areas of the county. And so that was one of them. The infrastructure capacity and access, like water and sewer, once again, that mirrors the comments. Let's put it in an area that makes a lot of sense. And interesting is zoning and regulatory limitations. And that's one of the things that we're going to help try and solve with the county through this process, is how do we remove or mitigate those barriers so that appropriate housing can be developed in the appropriate areas. Some of the other important findings that we got, one of the interesting things that was said is not necessarily about new housing development, but homeowners are having challenges finding not just affordable, but contractors to perform repairs. And so that could be a challenging one from the maintenance thing, which we talked about already, but also from the ability to do things like modernization or accessibility is finding someone who can perform that. Not surprisingly, renters are more sensitive to the impact of cost. You saw the cost burdening data a moment ago, but that came out in the survey. A strong emphasis for need for single level homes. There was a lot of conversation in the survey around ADA compliance and physical accessibility of housing units. And I think that didn't just come from older folks. It came from folks that also would just prefer single level living. Young adults anticipate their needs will change towards wanting to own and to wanting a larger home. And we talked about that, the disparity between incomes and cost of housing. Folks that maybe are renting and living in the county now may not be able to, even if they wanted to, stay in the county as their life cycle changes because of affordability issues. And then, as I mentioned earlier, seniors anticipate wanting a smaller home nearby amenities and services within the community or near family. And this yet again gets into, and so I know there are already conversations and things in place, but how do we improve things like accessory dwelling units or granny pods, as they're called, and folks can build a small unit where grandma and grandpa or grandma or grandpa can live there, and then the children and their grandchildren can live in the main unit, and creating opportunities to meet those growing needs in the community. The need for new price appropriate housing for all typologies, I mentioned this already, but it's worth repeating, is that this is not just one type of housing or another. This is not just all housing priced to persons earning below 50% or not. It's not all rentals or all ownership or all single family or all townhouse. There's a recognition, at least in the survey, which mirrors the data, that there's a need across all different typologies, and finding ways to diversify not just the cost, but the type of housing in the community is important. As I mentioned earlier, the demand to live near amenities and services, that's not an age thing. That's a growing national trend that is not unique to Roanoke County, but wanting to have housing that is closer to things that they can walk to, the store, a park, school, job, those sorts of things. Healthcare is driving some of that thing. The conversation around access to public transit, that's a whole nother conversation. Isaac, I'm not solving your transportation issues through a housing study, but it's important to recognize that there is a correlation between those things, and recognition that without having other means of transportation other than just a car creates limitations for folks in the community. So I'm going to pause here very quickly. Next steps, our next meeting, we're looking to do the housing need, a more deeper dive into the housing needs analysis, where we get more granular and come up with some very specific things that we identify. We did a site identification analysis. I talked to you about not having a lot of development appropriate locations in the county. We did a whole analysis on that. We are going to bring that back and present that to everybody. And then we're going to start talking a little bit more organized and synthesized for strategies. And we're projecting this to be sometime after Thanksgiving. The fourth meeting, which is projected to be sometime early in 2026, this is when the fund begins. This is when we start bringing back very specific recommendations for you all, for the staff, and for your elected leaders to consider and to get feedback from. That will be in January. And then we'll have a final presentation, not a public webinar like this, sometime in early March, where we present the findings of the study. So for me, not even 7 o'clock yet. Yay. All right. I want to thank you all for enduring my droning on. Hopefully you found the information enlightening, informative. And if there are questions, Isaac, I don't know if there are questions, but if there are questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thanks, Kyle. We do not currently have any questions. So maybe okay, got a question.
There we go. When you threaten people with stuff like that, when you
Yeah.
call them out, that's when you usually get them, Isaac.
It's just the question is, if we can give out like a printed copy or PDF of these slides to the public.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming on the website, the county's website, and Isaac, I'm happy if you want to make the presentation available digitally that way too. The county has this presentation, so we'll make sure it gets out there. Isaac, I don't know if you want to give them your contact information. I know we did the last time.
Yeah. I'll shoot you my email and then you can reach out and I'll get you the presentation.
Perfect. So let me ask you all this question, and maybe you can post it in the Q&A. Was there anything in here that was surprising or unexpected to all of you? And if you could just post that into the Q&A and Isaac will read it out, that would be great. Or is this kind of what you all intrinsically knew because you've been living and working in the community for so long? How are we doing, Isaac? Anything? So is everyone just logged in and they're actually watching TV?
Now we got one.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, it's always right when we get it. Okay. It's surprising that you've not included more data from surrounding areas, such as Roanoke City.
Oh, okay. Well, we have collected a lot of information about the communities around us. What I will say is I understand and appreciate the perspective of, well, what are these other communities doing to address housing needs? And I think that's a valid question to have. And we will, in the full report, there'll be more information around that. I guess my response to that in this situation would be, is that, you know, whether the city of Roanoke, for example, is building more rental housing, for example, than we are, is immaterial to the fact that the data is showing there's a need for it here too. Just as I wouldn't want other communities to try and solve our water and sewer problems or try to solve our electricity problems or create all the jobs for us, is you know, the reality is that there's need and opportunity here. And as the market continues to grow and evolve, and as the Roanoke region, the Valley continues to expand and continues to be in high demand, it's going to kind of require everybody to pitch in. And so I appreciate that comment. The report will have a little bit more information on some of that information. We wanted to focus the conversation around you all, around Roanoke County tonight, because I could talk about this stuff for hours, but I know that you would all start dropping off after about an hour and a half. And so we wanted to focus in on things specific to Roanoke County, but we'll make sure we include that information, particularly in the report. If there is a specific question that you have, whoever asked that question, about other communities in the Valley, please post it here or email it to Isaac, and then we'll make sure that we review it and we'll try and get a response back, not necessarily directly to you, but through this process, making sure we're addressing those thoughts and concerns. But thank you so much for that point.
So we have another attendee who is surprised that higher income earners are still challenged to find desirable housing options.
Yes, and it might not necessarily be a price issue per se. What we heard anecdotally is it oftentimes is the type of housing or the location of the housing that they're looking for. And so, like I said, a higher earning household of people in their 50s or 60s that have can't do stairs, there's not a lot of options in there. And in fact, in interviewing folks and through this process, we heard someone saying, I was looking for a particular type of housing unit, and I ended up having to move into Roanoke City because that's the only place where that housing was available. And so it's not always just about price, right? There may be units that they could afford, but as I mentioned earlier, there's also preference of what you want. I want a 6-bedroom home that's on 3 levels, or I want a townhouse, or I want a single level home that is walkable to a park. And so the fact that the lack of diversity of housing can create challenges for folks at all different income levels. But I do appreciate that. I do appreciate that comment, because it is important to realize that just because a household has means doesn't mean they're necessarily finding the housing that they want. And all the more reason why a community, Roanoke County or any community, should value, or we would encourage them to value, housing diversity so that you can accommodate people of all different incomes and backgrounds.
Thanks, Kyle. So we've got a couple here that are just kind of observations.
Great.
First one is my heart goes out to younger generations and families about how they're going to find suitable housing in our area. Yeah, I mean, that's a serious issue. Yeah.
That's a very fair and very real challenge. As is, if any of you have ever looked at a longitudinal housing versus income study, the value of housing continues to outpace incomes, not just here in Roanoke County, across the country. And so you're right. As younger folks are looking to get into either home ownership or they want to live in a desirable place to live, those opportunities are becoming harder and harder and harder as time goes on. And without strategies, not just, listen, I know Roanoke County is not going to solve all the housing issues for the valley, but as communities don't do their share, if you will, that will continue to be an issue. But I do appreciate that is a very real challenge that younger households are struggling. I'm sure you've seen there's been a number of articles that young households have given up on the opportunity of home ownership. If you Google, young people and foregoing home ownership, there's articles and articles about they're learning that younger households, they can't get the down payment or they're struggling to be able to find affordability. And so they're just saying, yeah, you know what, I'm just not going to own. And part of what we're trying to accomplish here through the study is find ways that we can create options for all people who live or work or who want to live in the county and not just certain ones. What was another comment, Isaac?
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, so another observation here. I'm thinking that people who want walkability live in the city or in Salem. People who want a farm live in the county. Not every kind of housing needs to be abundant in every locality. I've watched folks start in the city, then move to the county, then move back.
That's absolutely true. And I'm not here to argue that point. Is not every type of housing has to exist everywhere. And there are different places where different types of housing is more appropriate than others. The easy aspect is areas of the county that are not served with water and sewer are not appropriate locations, for example, for higher intensity housings that require that type of infrastructure to be able to be sanitary or to be healthy for a community. I can't disagree with you there. Where I will say is that a county as big as Roanoke, as diverse as Roanoke, and the fact that you have the city kind of in the middle of you, both city of Salem and city of Roanoke, I think there are places, my opinion would be, there are places where different housing is appropriate at different scales. And I think that Roanoke County has the capability to accommodate a variety of housing typologies and can do so in a manner that is respectful of people that have different preferences, but also in a manner that can create efficiencies that can address some of the challenges and issues that people have acknowledged through this process, things like traffic and accessibility. And so you're right. Not everything has to be everywhere. And I couldn't agree with you more. And maybe the county does say, hey, look, that's not for us, and that's okay. We're not here to tell Roanoke County and its community what to do or not to do. Our job is to point out what is the supply and demand equilibrium. What are people asking for that live here, that want to live here? And then the community makes the determination of how it wants to address that, or if it wants to address that. So I absolutely appreciate that. And I think that should be part of the community discourse when the community starts talking about implementing solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. So far we've only gotten one more comment, which is just someone expressing thanks for putting it together and making the information public.
I would say you're very, very welcome, but that would be self-serving given the fact that I'm here for a reason. But I will give my gratitude to Isaac and the county staff who have championed doing this and have been very involved and engaged in making sure that what we produce is valuable and important to help the community understand the situation and be able to make informed decisions. So I will turn that thank you back to you, Isaac and Philip and the rest of the staff, because without you, we would not be able to do as good of a job as we can.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'll turn the thank you back to you because you've done the vast majority of the legwork here. Yeah, we greatly appreciate you guys helping us
Yes.
out with this.
Fair enough.
So maybe should we give people a couple more minutes if anyone has any additional questions?
Tell you what, you have 3 minutes. If we don't get any more comments in 3 minutes, we will shut it down. How about that? Is that fair?
Sounds good. So
Okay.
yeah, if you have any questions or comments, just get them in by 7:10 if you want Kyle to answer them tonight. Otherwise, just shoot me an email. I dropped my email address in the chat. So if you have any additional questions or want copy of the presentation, just shoot me an email and I'll get one to you.
That's a perfect segue, Isaac. Thank you, because that was what I was about to say is just because you don't ask the question right now, you may be, getting ready for bed tonight, brushing your teeth, and then that question finally pops in your head. Just because you didn't get to ask it during the meeting doesn't mean you shouldn't ask it. Please get any questions you have about the study, the data, whatever, to Isaac, and we will do our best to address it and maybe post it on the county website or make sure it's incorporated in a future presentation. But the conversation doesn't end just because the presentation does. And before everybody starts jumping off, because a couple of people left, I want to reiterate my thank you for all of you for attending and for participating and for caring enough to listen and participate and to share your voices. This has been very helpful for us as we start transitioning away from data gathering and analysis into strategy making. All right, well, people are dropping off, Isaac, and I'm assuming you haven't received any more questions or comments.
I have not, no.
All right, we'll
No.
give them their 30 seconds, and then we will call it a night. For those of you who are stuck around, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here.
And a recording will be up on the website also. So if you know anyone that was interested that didn't get to watch it, we'll have a recording up on the study webpage.
Fantastic.
All right, well, it's 7:10. Haven't
It is
gotten any more
7:10.
questions. Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to connecting with you all again in a couple of months.
Thanks, everyone.